Hello and welcome to Amnesty International and Fight for the Future's 7th Salon on the implications of Web3 technologies for human rights and activism. I'm Leah Holland, Campaigns and Communications Director with Fight for the Future. I use they or she pronouns and I'm based in Portland, Oregon. Today's subject is abortion rights, reproductive justice, and Web3 technologies. As platforms like Google and Facebook censor and punish those who share information about reproductive healthcare, the specter of financial censorship and deplatforming that traditionally marginalized communities have been facing for many years also looms large. And I promise I'll do 20 push-ups after this event for saying it, but could crypto fix this? It's a tumultuous time for Web3 projects, and not only financial ones. Coinbase has entered into data sharing contracts with immigrations and customs enforcement. Surveillance companies like Chainalysis show a grotesque eagerness to chip away at the privacy promises of blockchain. Could the permanent immutable records that blockchains make end up endangering abortion seekers, providers, and supporters? Some artists and activists are already leveraging Web3 technologies to fundraise for abortion and access funds. And privacy researchers looking into Web3 certainly also have a lot to say. This is not a clean-cut conversation we're about to have. Instead, it's a conversation in which I hope we can identify for ourselves and each other the right questions we need to continue to pursue as we consider what roles cryptocurrencies, organizing tools like DAOs, and the NFT artistic movement will ultimately play in the fight against forced birth. And with that, I'll hand the screen off to Michael Kleinman, Director of the Silicon Valley Initiative at Amnesty International.
Hi, everyone, and thank you guys so much for joining. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce today's three panelists. First, we have Sahar Afrakhan, who's a founding member of COWGIRLDAO, and Sahar will talk about DAOs as a tool for social impact, what they're able to unlock in terms of speed and scale, and then specifically what COWGIRLDAO is working on. And I will put links to the COWGIRLDAO toolkit and contribution guide in the chat in just a moment. Then we will hear from Molly Dickson, an NFT artist and co-founder, Computer Cowgirls and COWGIRLDAO. And Molly will talk about the NFT side of things. Why, as an artist, she's looked to NFTs as her medium of choice in fundraising. And this touches a bit on COWGIRLDAO and the work that they're doing around reproductive rights. And then finally, we'll hear from Sean O'Brien, a lecturer in cybersecurity at Yale Law School and the founder of the Privacy Lab at Yale. And Sean's going to talk about reproductive privacy, including the pitfalls of our current web and the potential for Web3 technologies and networks to protect reproductive rights through strong privacy and autonomy. And with that, I will hand it over to Sahar.
Thank you for that awesome introduction. I'm super excited to be in partnership with these other two amazing speakers, Molly and Sean. So COWGIRLDAO is a DAO, and I'll stay fairly simple in describing what DAOs are just for folks who aren't so familiar, but a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. And we're a global army of volunteer activists that have joined forces to fund and engage in the fight for reproductive rights. Before I kind of get into COWGIRLDAO's mission, I'll talk a little bit about what exactly a DAO is and why it's powerful and what sorts of forms it can take. A DAO is, in essence, an online community that organizes around a shared mission and is powered by Web3 or blockchain technology. Members get to contribute and get back governance tokens, and those tokens kind of let you vote on what DAOs do. They can take all forms. Right now, the applications are very broad. So some common ones are investment projects, where groups organize to buy assets together, either physical assets like an NBA team, that's a current DAO project, or digital collectibles. There are NFT projects, so organizing community for holders of that NFT. And then the one that I'm going to talk about a little bit more is social impact projects. And that's organizing community in support of a social impact mission like voter activation, climate change, abortion rights, and so on. DAOs are fairly new. They've only really been around for a few years. So everything in the space is really exciting and really nascent and kind of at the ground floor. And they've evolved recently to become the de facto sort of crypto entity. That being said, most DAOs still need a formal legal entity backing them, like an LLC or a nonprofit. But if you're starting a startup in crypto, today you're essentially creating a DAO. Okay, so that's like a 30-second primer on DAOs. Now, Choice DAO started a few months ago when the decision to overturn Roe was first leaked. And my co-pilot Reshma, the woman who started a foundation called Girls Who Code, and I started talking. We were looking at the repo rights space, asking, how can we get fresh funding for these initiatives? Historically, the funding for this issue has been coming from donors that you can count on one hand. So we were asking, like, what happens when that all dries up? Inevitably, and even more importantly, how can we infuse new ideas and mobilize this upcoming generation of activists to carry the torch forwards and onwards? And the answer that we came to was there's a lot of power in Web3, and so we wanted to start a project in Web3 as a DAO. We think that it has the keys to strengthen social movements in the future. It's the future of how we're going to organize. It's a new source of funds, and it lets us tap into a global community fairly quickly. When the decision came out, people were really mad. They wanted to get involved, but weren't sure what to do. I was having these conversations all day, every day. And a lot of people feel like you can donate, you can vote, you can tweet, but unfortunately the current system leaves us questioning the impact of those actions. And we feel sort of left out of the process of building change and creating the future that we want. And so this comes like the power of decentralization really comes in here, which is a core feature of Web3 that breaks down traditional hierarchies. It creates space for real bottoms-up, community-driven, grassroots organizing. And it's also geo-agnostic. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world. If the mission resonates with you, you can participate. And so in our community, we have people all over the world. It's not just a US issue, it feels global. And that helps us reach more people and faster than movements have ever been able to do before. The superpower of Choice DAO and social impact DAOs isn't about fundraising to me. I think it's deeply rooted in the power of our community's time and expertise and passions. So, I mean, like, let's say we have 1,000 members, and if we can figure out how to leverage 1 hour of each member's time per week to support the work for abortion rights, that's collectively 1,000 hours a week. And that's not an easy task. It's going to be bumpy to figure this out, but if it's done even sort of effectively, it can be incredibly powerful. We've already been able to onboard, for example, big nonprofits in the repo rights space to set up crypto wallets, which sets them up with a new source of runway even beyond our project. And we have 600 or so now members who are all invested in building tools to support the folks on the ground. So I believe there's uncapped potential in Web3 for social impact work that will define this new generation of activists, even beyond our movement. I think every movement or initiative should be able to tap into this power. And our goal is not, just to raise money right now, but it's to become this innovation hub for activists to help solve problems in this space and establish a new model of change in parallel with all the work that's already going on. So we want to figure out how we can supercharge them. So that's my kind of intro. And I also wanted to share, we officially launched for contributions yesterday, which we're very thrilled about. And if you'd like to get involved, we're over at thechoicedao.org and would love to have you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And now Molly. And Molly, I will put a link to Computer Cowgirls in the chat as well.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, first of all, so much for having me. It's an honor to be on this panel, and I look forward to hearing more discussion about how we can be inventive in Web3 for these issues. I'm Molly Dickson. I'm a commercial artist, and in some ways, an accidental NFT artist. As an artist, I no background in technology. I do feel a little bit like a normie or an outsider to a lot of Web3 conversations, but I do think maybe it's interesting to look at that as how someone like myself has intuitively come into this space and interacted with this new technology. Just a little bit of background on my project. I launched Computer Cowgirls in early February of this year. I'm a Texas-based artist, so it was 201 animated cowgirls raising money for abortion rights in Texas, kind of as a response to SB8. We also have another collection that we've launched since the draft leak And I won't apologize for the name of the collection, but I'll censor a little bit, and it is the FU collection, which we're still minting. Between those two collections, we've raised about a little over $70,000 for abortion rights. And of course, we hope to continue to raise money. We've also launched COWGIRLDAO, which will be the nonprofit arm of Computer Cowgirls going forward. As an artist, I love the idea of a DAO because I'm not like, I don't want to be the end, like the one that controls everything. I think there are people with better ideas. And of course, our collector base has a variety of backgrounds that are so beneficial in coming up with not only how we can market and raise money, but how we can productively and efficiently spend the money. So I'll dive into NFTs a little bit. And of course, the big question is always why NFTs? Like, is this a Kickstarter on steroids? Why did you choose NFTs over t-shirts? And of course, NFTs are a very small part of the blockchain, and they have probably the worst reputation, and a lot of that arguably deservedly so, probably. But I think for me as an artist, the term NFT is a little broad, and I think in the future we'll be able to narrow down how different NFT projects, what their goals are, how they operate, and what kind of collectors they attract. Because of course, NFT is anything that's minted on the blockchain, which can include collectibles, gaming, and information, and arguably art. And people collect them for a variety of reasons too. I do think the question ignores a little bit the social, how our culture follows technology, and how we basically created digital identities with the rise of social media, and how, especially with last summer, Black Lives Matter, how we kind of expect those digital identities to show the causes that we care about. And we also kind of demand that businesses show that they care about the causes too, that we align ourselves with. I think Web3 is an interesting extension of that, and that not only can you show causes you care about just on that cultural level, but you also can show that you put your money where your mouth is. So I think there's something very interesting about that can kind of be gamified in some ways, but also just like that can be what it is. The speed of being able to raise funds and organize in Web3 is, for me personally, is unparalleled. Of course, being a motion artist, it does give me a little bit of a platform that I wasn't able to use to have like a direct line to a consumer, to someone to buy a piece of digital art. I don't think about Web3 as being so much of a platform as a new medium. And I think I've learned as an artist to embrace that more and more. I also think there's something interesting about like an all-in model of an NFT project for royalties alone. I know in my project, several of our Cowgirls, they've raised more money on the secondary market than they raised in their initial minting. And we actually have a kind of a tally, a leaderboard of who those top Cowgirls are of their lifetime, which I think kind of goes back to how is this not just a cause we care about, but then there's like a little bit of gamification to it too. If you buy a Cowgirl in secondary, you can feel good if she moves up the leaderboard, and you know that money has also gone to a cause that you care about. Of course, I joined Web3 not knowing much about it. I think just kind of like all in. That's why I say I'm accidental. So I think I fully didn't appreciate privacy in this space, which is why I'm undoxed. But I do think the ability, especially for this cause, to anonymously make donations, anonymously collect in a way, because your identity can be hidden, but you can still show support for a cause. I think that's an interesting thing, and I think it'll be pivotal thinking about privacy and those issues going forward, especially as we continue to raise money and hopefully delegate it out efficiently. Trying to think what else there is. Some interesting things, I think, as far as like NFT as a medium. What could NFTs be? I think there's so many interesting things with technology as far as NFTs are signals. They can evolve over time. Could NFTs be information when we're worried about censorship of how to seek an abortion? Could they be signals that, you see NFTs that react to what's happening in the world with the weather that day, with what's on Twitter? Could those NFTs change over time and be some kind of like beacon that helps people know what's going on in states where things might be censored? I think photojournalism alone is interesting as far as if you need to be an anonymous photographer, but images are powerful. It's a way that you could license it out to publications and gain awareness. And then I think things like POABs are super interesting to think about. You could get a POAB if you vote in the midterms, or we can actually kind of start controlling, or not controlling, but incentivizing activist behavior with NFTs in ways that we actually need people to show up for this cause. So with that, I'll just conclude by saying thank you again, and I really look forward to continuing this discussion.
Molly, thank you so much. And Sean, over to you.
Sure. Yeah, this is incredible. Thank you all for your perspectives. So I'm going to start with a bit of a history lesson, I guess. I think it's important if we're talking about reinventing the web, right? Web3, we have to know a little bit about where we're going, obviously, well, a lot, hopefully, but we also need to know a lot about how we got here. You know, Privacy Lab here at Yale University, we've been running that for approximately 5 years. And before that, I was also doing surveillance self-defense workshops for activists, going back to about the 2010s and really picking up steam with the Snowden revelations 2013 and onward. During that time period, we had a thing called Web 2.0. Right? And now it's sort of the butt of jokes, but that was a big marketing term, and it was a big sort of transformation, not only in the way that applications were run, but also in the network structure, the network topology, right? And really underlying all of this, who controlled that network topology, who controlled the delivery of applications to users, and sort of the methods that that was done. So when we were starting to see that impact, you know, and especially with the social media sites that we now know, and everyone knows, I hope, you know, the Facebooks and the Twitters and so on that are just terrible and spy on people and have really ill effects on society in general. Those websites were some of the first full-fledged web applications that were using this Web 2.0 technology and breaking down what we used to emphasize in the web world, which was called the client-server model, right? So this model had users at the edge of the network primarily, but you know, requesting information from a server. So the users were the client, the server was the server, and that could be, you know, me running a web server from my basement and having some forum or something. It doesn't have to be some big tech thing. But in this time period, it started to become those big tech things, right? There was a lot of emphasis about breaking down this model and sort of having a situation where the client was constantly, you know, being very verbose, sending a ton of information to the server and loading, you know, the application and most of the assets, most of the data that would run and power the application from that server instead of running that application locally on their own computer. So you can see sort of how there's this change in the autonomy and the empowerment on the part of the user and what they could and potentially couldn't do on their own machine, right? And that coincided, of course, with the rise of the smartphone. So, you know, again, when I started doing workshops showing people how to be more private, more secure, we didn't really focus much on smartphones because folks were just sort of wrapping their head around the iPhone. But, you know, pretty quickly that started to take over. And this cloud model, right, as it came to be called, this centralized delivery of big tech stuff started to dominate. And we found ourselves shifting from, you know, the sort of geeky stuff, talking about cryptography and how great math is for being able to make us, you know, private and verifiable and potentially anonymous online, to shifting to sort of saying, whoa, you know, you have this thing in your pocket and it's tracking everything you do, and the applications on it are completely not to be trusted. And not only that, they're talking to all of these intermediaries and sending all this data sort of upstream to these folks. So that's sort of the background of this Web 2.0 world we're coming from, and the thing that I think needs to be dismantled and replaced with something else. And in that, you know, I think that's where Web3 can shine if we're able to accomplish those things. But of course, we have to value things like privacy. We have to preserve things which can often be quite controversial, like anonymity, if we're going to have the actual empowerment that Web3, you know, promises us. So, a major sort of observation back then, which still holds to be true when we're doing workshops or when I'm speaking to folks online or people reach out to me for some sort of advice about cybersecurity or privacy or whatever, is that folks aren't truly aware of how talkative their computers are, their phones are, or even when they're going on the internet or, they're really never off the internet, right? So opening up an app is like being in a web browser and going out to a website, right? And conceiving of apps as these sort of always on surveillance pipes to someone on the internet is the right conception of the current model of these apps. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? We can have applications that we, run on our devices, right? That run the code on the client side, on the user side, empower users, keep data that's important and precious to those users local, and communicate out to these, other intermediaries, these other servers, hopefully peers, right? Peer-to-peer networks, what we're starting to again embrace, which is decentralized networks, decentralization. You can have that model replace the big tech stuff. And we're starting to see that. And I think that's really important. To me, that when we talk about Web3, it's sort of like a reinvention of the promise that we already had with the lessons we've taken from sort of the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years of, just the internet being turned into this centralized thing controlled by a few powerful corporations and many times governments as well. We have the opportunity to turn that on its face. There's still a window of time that we can do that. And decentralized apps and Web3 powered technologies have done a good job already of sort of turning the tables in certain areas. So we can solve for those mistakes. We can solve for centralization, right? We can sort of take that basket of technologies that's being called Web3, and we can resurrect, a vision of the internet that was much more empowered for the end user, empowered for populations, communities, about actual information sharing, about actual collaboration, all of those things that unfortunately to an entire generation or maybe two now are sort of a distant, fairy tale or, dream that folks like me, who remember that version of the internet just tell them, right? Okay, now why does this matter for reproductive rights? Well, fertility, reproduction, sex, these are some of the things that are the biggest interest to the current, sort of centralized, big tech powered Web 2.0 world, as far as monetizing, ads, monetizing surveillance, the thing that Shoshana Zuboff has appropriately called surveillance capitalism. Fertility specifically, fertility trackers have been in the spotlight in this regard. Folks purchasing things like pregnancy tests. You may have seen, for example, on Twitter, I think it was only a few days ago, someone posted that they went to a Walgreens, they bought a pregnancy test, and then, a short time later, they were shipped out a little package that had, a baby package with formula and these other things. Even while, of course, there was, and I think still is, a formula shortage in the United States. So that just goes to show how easy it is and how powerful, it can be to have data about someone's purchases, right? And this is going to be at the core, of course, of reproductive rights, in general, right? When folks are purchasing birth control, when folks are, going to get some sort of healthcare or fertility care or going to a clinic, the information trails that they leave all over the place are going to be used against them. That coupled with location markers saying whether you traveled between states and so on, obviously, that's very, very dangerous in a world where Roe v. Wade has been struck down. So what can Web3 do to sort of turn this around? Well, I've got a short list here and we can go into it, in the discussion, but we can have distributed data stores with decentralized computing, right? I think that's the first real serious start. We've got to think seriously about the network topology and take the intermediaries out who can surveil, activity of folks. We have the potential for real, what folks are calling zero trust, verified blockchain technologies, ways to verify users, ways to conduct transactions, ways to move digital assets without doxing identities, right? And potentially we can do these things in a real anonymous, truly anonymous way, right? If we're serious about it. And underpinning all of that, of course, we have strong encryption, right? We still have networks that are built on these encryption technologies. We have networks that are good at obfuscating data trails, like the Tor network and so on. And these kinds of networks are going to be essential to people's privacy. We need to stop looking at them as, sort of some dirty thing we shouldn't be using, or some scary dark web, as it's been unfortunately branded by all the antivirus companies and so on.
Sean, sorry, one second. I very much apologize. We do need you to wrap it up in just a minute or two so we can get to the Q&A. And I apologize.
I can do that. I'll get there.
Interruption.
I'm just winding up, but thank you. I know I can be a little verbose. And on top of this, we are going to have local client-side user-powered applications. We can have nomadic, portable identities. And as the other folks in the panel did such a great job talking about, we can have new forms of governance models, real community collaboration. And that's sort of, again, sort of resurrecting this old dream that some people, unfortunately, including myself on a bad day, might have thought died. So I really think we can do that with Web3. I really think reproductive rights are going to be at the heart of that. And I really think if we take our technology seriously for things like cybersecurity, privacy, anonymity, it's sort of a litmus test whether we can meet the use cases that are going to be really important for folks who need reproductive privacy.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was incredibly informative. As always, I really appreciate all of that information, and I'm excited to go back and watch the video from this event. So we're going to transition to the Q&A. We already have some questions from the audience and a bunch of questions that we've collected in advance as well. So thank you, Zoomers. Please feel free to also ask your questions. So I'll aim this at Molly first, but anybody feel free to jump in, and this is an attendee question. There was a point brought up about fundraising and association with identity using NFTs. Is the point here to incentivize putting money where your mouth is so people can show their support for a cause, or is the point instead to allow folks to privately share information and donations supporting abortion in states where it is or becomes illegal? Or alternatively, do you imagine that there's a space where we can have both ideas? Can these projects and this new technological paradigm enable both actions to exist simultaneously?
Yeah, I think the answer is both, for sure both. I think one is important when we look to blockchain technology and be like, how can this help us share information? And of course, there's always problems with who has access to this, and that's something that I think we also have to discuss. The people that need it the most, do they have the ability to access this information? But yes, I think it's super important. As far as the social aspect, I think that's inherently the next evolution of how we're already interacting with our digital identities online. And as an artist, when I came into this space, it really seemed to me that it was a very politically neutral space. So I think, as we've asked companies to not be neutral, we can also ask bigger projects, like the projects that have VC and that are big, heavyweights in the space, to maybe align themselves with the cause. And that doesn't necessarily mean they have to buy an NFT, but I do think we have the right to kind of make Web3 what we want it to be right now, which to me, is that the activist NFTs are a small part of the blockchain, and the activist side of that is even like the most sliver of NFTs. And I think we have the ability to say we want it to be more. I think part of that is saying, this is a cause I care about, and this is where I put my money to, not just projects that I think are going to make me money in the long run, but that I believe in, and I know this money went to a direct cause. And maybe I was part of the DAO that helped decide how that money was spent.
Sahar, Sean, do you want to add on to that?
I totally agree with everything that Molly said. And I think with this like upcoming group of people that are building Web3 and even just general consumers, like there's this trend towards putting your dollars where your values are. You know, consumers hold brands more accountable than before, I think, in thinking about their practices and the way that they manufacture and the materials that they use and like more sustainable clothing sorts of things. And like within Web3, there is a small bubble of social impact focused work, but I think I'm just hearing so much more chatter in that space, and I think it's gonna burst. And it's not just in the lens of activism, it's how do we build more sustainable organizations. There's another project I was learning about called Early Majority, which is an outdoor apparel company from a woman who used to work at Patagonia, and she is starting an outdoor apparel company from the perspective of a woman and building in these sort of like community layers to support their audience and to get them more involved in sustainable apparel and the mission of like climate change with tokens and with different types of NFTs, which is really cool. So there's a lot of interplay too between not just Web3, but what does like the future of consumer look like with blockchain technology?
Yeah, I mean, I would just be interested to hear from others about how this is all turning out with organizing. It seems to me extremely exciting. I do have concerns, of course, and having worked with especially groups of activists about sort of there's this interplay, right, where you want to be an effective activist and you want to make an impact. And one of the ways you do that is by being known, letting your voice be heard, you know, and really organizing, right? But that leaves a lot of information about you out there on the internet. And where we can, I think we need to try to use technologies and learn the best we can to use technologies that will sort of protect our identities and so on. But I know it's not easy, right? And that sort of friction between wanting to be private, but knowing that you don't have very much power in the digital world when you are, can be a real serious friction, especially for folks who are trying to make change in the world. So.
And a quick follow-up question to all of this. And again, this is for all three panelists. And, you know, certainly Leah spoke about this at the beginning, that we are certainly not going through a Web3 moment anymore. And so what do you say to critics who feel that reproductive justice organizations accepting cryptocurrency donations are unethical for doing so? Or how do you respond to criticisms about sort of whether it's the environmental aspects of Web3 or some of the other negative implications?
I can start. I think with any new technology, there's a roadmap to making it more efficient and equitable. And that's true right now in the not fake meat, but yeah, like meat replacement, like an Impossible Burger, Beyond Burger. It's not more efficient than killing a chicken as far as environmental impact. But if we can convince consumers of this taste, and you know, stem cell research is doing a lot of cool things to make it possible to reduce the environmental impact of these faux meats, then it's a really powerful future that we can build where we don't need to offset, or we can't offset all this like carbon emission with new technology. We just need to get it out there. It's the V1 and then build and iterate over time. And then as far as the like bear market, so I think that will happen with blockchain too. There's a lot of movement on that front. As far as the bear market, this is a decade-long fight. Like reproductive rights we're just getting started. And so focusing on the short-term market conditions isn't gonna help really. We need to act now, we need to start now, and we need to continue pushing forward energy into this so we can create change sustainably over the long run. And so we're looking at the project as sure, like the market conditions aren't great for fundraising right now, but they change very quickly. ETH swings 60% month over month in some periods. And for folks who have been in Web3 for a long time, this isn't their first crypto winter, and things will swing back at some point.
I'll just jump in. The environmental question I think is a legit concern, and I don't think anything Web3 is above criticism. I think it's something that we have to navigate on multi levels. Obviously, we know that it will become more efficient. I know with my project in particular, we make decisions based on that. Like we don't, you know, when we have like an 1155 token, we use that. There are ways where we try to limit like gas wars and just try to be as like conscious about it as possible. I do think it's also how much are we consuming? What are we consuming? What are we producing? I think that's a big thing that we have to worry about in general, but maybe even magnified in Web3. We don't want to be like the fast fashion of Web3. So, you know, who is benefiting from these? Where's the money going? Like, how are we spending our resources, and what is the cost ratio there, and is it worth it? So yeah, I think it is something that we navigate and we consider, and I think we're thinking about it. Sahar said, I mean, we have urgency for this cause, which I think pushes our timeline up a little bit. I know for me even personally, more than maybe I would like to, but I think it's something that we think of short term and long term, and unfortunately it is a very long term fight. And I think long term, we're looking at something that is more energy efficient.
Yeah, I would just echo all of that. But I want to make sure I say here, and I think it's really important to keep in mind, you know, I mean, of course, environmental concerns are real, right? But I don't see anybody talking about, hey, what are the environmental concerns of advertising technology and running dozens of different trackers and applications churning CPUs all day, right? You don't see folks who are worried about these huge data centers that Google is running, that Facebook is running, and so on. And a lot of that is greenwashed and just sort of overlooked. I'm not necessarily convinced that, you know, when you look at the MasterCards and the banking system and all of the Wall Street, you know, stuff that's tied to all of that apparatus, that, you know, and I'm talking office buildings and transportation and entire industries here. I'm not necessarily convinced that when we look at these breakdowns of the amount of energy that, let's say, proof of work mining can use, that we're getting an honest depiction of what a credit card transaction actually does as far as energy use on the flip side. So I think it's important to keep in mind. I think there's ways to be greener. I think we have consensus models we can use. One of the ones I'm very much interested in, Byzantine fault tolerance, where we can find other ways to reach consensus that don't necessarily have to use proof of work or proof of stake. I think we can share other resources. You know, you have like the Helium network doing proof of connection, right? Bandwidth sharing, essentially, that we can talk about in ways where we can reach consensus and really build these zero trust, trustless, whatever word we're going to use, verified networks without having to, you know, have everything follow sort of the Bitcoin model. But I just, you know, powerful folks are going to use this against well-meaning activists who care about the environment, because there's an understanding that folks who are changing the world in these other ways, who are fighting for reproductive rights, who are trying to build networks that dismantle the centralized spying of big tech, there's an understanding that those are the folks who also care about the environment, who are also, you know, dreadfully worried about climate change. So therefore, the green issue can be used as sort of a bludgeon against us. And I think we need to remind ourselves not to fall too much into the trap of embracing that, and to also look where that message is coming from. And often it's the folks who are spying on us, who don't actually care about climate change, right? And who don't care about reproductive rights or really empowerment of anyone. And so that's something, or except themselves, of course, but that's something we need to keep in mind and always sort of top of head. So.
Great points, everyone. I'll also just toss in the encouraging that I've really been encouraged by seeing legislators and environmental organizations that are doing nuanced analysis alike push towards regulating fossil fuels, not code. Which is something that we definitely need more of, whether it's what's powering a Facebook data center or what's powering an abortion rights NFT project. So this next question, I'll aim it at you, Sean, but anybody feel free to hop in. How concerned are you about blockchain information being used retroactively to identify and punish abortion patients, providers, and supporters? What privacy concerns do people need to keep in mind? And, is Web3 truly anonymous? I guess that's a leading question. I know your answer will be to that, but yeah, what do we need to keep in mind here?
Sure. So, blockchain is basically a distributed ledger, right? And it can have lots of information in there about the folks who are participating in a network or, making purchases, who are moving around in the quote unquote real world. And that digital information can be really, really verbose, or it can be obfuscated in many ways so that the trail is harder to follow, or potentially, and I think some networks do a really good job, like Monero, actually anonymous, right? But the problem is, right, it's easier to build a blockchain that has lots and lots of information in it. It's easier to build consensus models that rely upon, sort of very simple transactional information being stored. And we know there's entire industries now that are chain analysis and everything else that are working on, rebuilding transaction, sender receiver information from these networks. They're very efficient about it. They talk about it, in Congress, and how amazing they are at rebuilding all of this. That's going to be a huge, huge problem. It's going to potentially make the kind of purchase information that I was talking about, that problem worse. Although I will say now, when you go to a pharmacy, when you go to a store, when you visit a clinic or visit doctors, certainly, there's a lot of information and data trails already being left, already being correlated, already ending up, in these big data farms or being breached. I mean, we don't even talk about breaches anymore because they're happening so often, right? So to specifically sort of look at blockchain as like, I don't know, somehow, some way making folks unprivate in a world where they're currently private is obviously the wrong way to look at it. I do think this information is going to be used against folks. I don't know exactly how, but I'm worried. And that's why we need to be serious when we're building new technologies to actually take the time to build in privacy by design principles, and so on and so forth. Generally speaking, that's harder. Generally speaking, that's going to be, require more serious effort. It's going to require talking to folks. What kind of data does need to be, hidden? When we do surveillance self-defense workshops, I try to tailor it to the actual audience and not just assume that I know everything about what folks actually need to hide. There's going to have to be that conversation, but we can have it now, and we need to have it now. And, as I said, I think it needs to be sort of a litmus test for whether our Web3 technologies are succeeding, because this is going to be something that's heavily tracked and criminalized. It's already being criminalized, right? And those data trails in blockchain records are certainly going to be part of that. I don't remember the other part, but most Web3 technologies, unfortunately, still have a mix of the old cloud model in them. So if we're looking for true anonymity, you often are using a decentralized app that has, decentralized consensus models, right? And some sort of decentralized governance model, let's say. But you're using either your web browser or your phone to go out to an application that's loading data from a centralized CDN, often Amazon. Right. So you look at networks like Steemit, and you're loading a social app that's running off a decentralized blockchain, but it's got a CDN that's just pulling in all kinds of stuff. And I don't mean to single them out, but there's lots and lots of apps that do that. And we need to be serious about, maybe you launch that way, right? Maybe you bootstrap that way because that's how you know how to do it. But we need to start breaking those pieces out and being serious about decentralizing the entire stack, not just part of it. So.
Sean, thank you so much. And Molly or Sahar, do you guys want to add anything to that?
Sean covered it for me. He's far deeper in his knowledge than I am on that question.
Ditto.
Well, I do have a question for both of you guys, and this comes from one of the people who's listening. So if the amount of your donation translates to tokens, translates to voting power, how do we avoid sort of an oligarchical situation where people with more resources have more power within a DAO?
Yeah. So DAOs have these governance frameworks that sort of outline the set of binding rules that determines how the community operates. So there's a lot of models and ways to support governance in DAOs. But in a nutshell, the goal is to create governance that feels accessible to all rather than a select few. And so that in part is like how you manage the treasury, how you secure the funds, roles and responsibilities that protect the treasury and other operational guiding posts. And there are lots of different strategies you can employ. So at 2 different points, I guess there's like a correction for that type of distribution of power. One is at the point of contribution. So there's different ways you can distribute the tokens. One is like immediately when you contribute. Another way is through a claim mechanism later, or you can airdrop tokens to people. And so we chose to, just for ease and simplicity's purpose, distribute tokens automatically upon contribution to a, I think it's one token. Yeah, it's a $1 to like contributed 1 token rule set. And so those tokens get distributed, you put $10,000 in, you get 10,000 tokens. And then of course, that means that people who contribute more get more voting power in the form of tokens. But then when you go to vote, and so voting comes into play where you create these proposals to say, you know, I think we should give this much money to this organization for these reasons. People use their tokens to vote on the proposal. And then you can employ different voting strategies to kind of correct for that distribution, unequal distribution of power. So you can employ either the same rule set, so 1 token equals 1 vote, or you can try something like quadratic voting, which would mean up to a certain threshold, you get X amount of voting power, and then beyond that, it corrects down. Or there's like, you can set some maximum kind of governance power rule in the voting. And we're using a tool called Snapshot, which does off-chain voting, which means that the votes that are passed won't get executed on chain, which is another way to kind of protect the security of our funds. So if someone does end up hijacking the vote, which is unlikely given our governance framework, but we want to be safe, that we can kind of correct that before it gets executed on blockchain. And so there's a lot of different ways you can think about how to control power dynamics and centralization within the voting structure and governance framework itself. There's like hundreds of different voting strategies, but that's kind of how we were thinking about it. And we ended up employing a 1 vote equals 1 token rule set for now, and then we'll iterate over time just for simplicity's sake to start, depending on what problems arise as a result of that voting mechanism.
I'll just add that I agree with all of that. The DAOs are so interesting, right? Because it's like a utopian idea that we're still like, we're tweaking it always, trying to make it just as, you know, as efficient as possible, and how centralized, how decentralized we want to be to actually get things done. I like to say COWGIRLDAO is a baby DAO because we launched early reactively to the leak, and we're like running before we can walk, right? We do have a 1 token, 1 vote system for now, but everything about these systems are they're plastic in a way where we can adapt as needed, which I think is interesting. One thing that was brought to our attention, which wasn't really mentioned in the question, but is how do you stay ideologically aligned, and is there a threat, especially for this cause, outside groups coming up, buying up all your tokens and flipping what your goal is of the project, and you can see how that could be very problematic for funds raised for this. And so we have like a veto board, which basically has no voting power, but they just have the power to say like, no, you can't go fund, you know, pro-life only movements and totally change what our DAO is supposed to be doing. So there are some things like that that I think are tricky to think about, but it is like a work in progress of just getting it, you know, down, and so that it's efficient and it works for the long haul, really.
Yeah, I think starting with that, like, what is the minimum effective dose of governance, while thinking through all the possible attack vectors and maybe picking and choosing what you think are the most likely or the most risky ones, and then giving yourself the flexibility, like saying in the governance framework, you can amend this and you can pass that through a vote. And so there's a democratic process that empowers the community to evolve in a really decentralized feel way, versus saying one person gets to choose what the governance framework is going to be always, I think is a good way to set yourself up for success, because also the space changes so fast and we find better solutions really quickly. And so giving yourself space to evolve and grow is also important when thinking of your project needs.
We're coming up on our last few minutes here. I'm hoping that we can squeeze in at least 2 more. So this is also aimed more towards Molly and Sahar and going off of what you've just been speaking about. So acknowledging that this is very much a baby technology and a lot of us are running before we can walk. Do people have problems accessing and participating? Who is or who do you think is participating in your projects?
Well, they have to have a wallet, which is like the biggest hurdle of, I mean, we've all been there. That initial hurdle of getting into the space is enormous. And I think having this be accessible is a conversation, that it's a large conversation that we have to figure out. I mean, tech always has that issue. And I feel like maybe it's even larger in some ways in Web3 in the ways that we need to focus to fix, as much as we have all these opportunities of decentralized information, of it not being controlled by certain platforms, that also it becomes a little tricky that way. So I already lost train of thought. But I'll see if Sahar has anything to add to that.
Yeah, so Discord is a really common tool to manage community, and it's really native for Web3 people because they're in many different projects. And so you just have like your multiple Discord servers up all the time and you're engaging, and there's a lot of like automations you can build into the operation and so forth. So most of our community, active communities in the Discord, and they come from both the repro rights space and Web3. There's a significant amount of people that have been like, I've been lurking around Web3 for a long time, and I wanted to learn about it, but it's too big of a hump to get over. And so this project gave me a reason, like it gave me a mission to lean in. And now I'm learning all about Web3. I'm getting a full-time job in Web3. Like we've been hearing all sorts of awesome stories. I do think though, just to get into Web3, you need to have a reason or a mission or something that pulls you in, because it is like a different language. It's like you're learning finance. And once you learn all the acronyms, you kind of got it down. It's not rocket science, but Web3 has a lot of that kind of accessibility problem right now too. So there's a lot of education for people that are really excited and passionate about repro rights space to get them educated on what the project is, and also what is a crypto wallet, what is Web3, what are all these terms. And we've been exploring like town halls, like Web3 town halls, to kind of educate people through it live, and also creating a lot of written and video collateral to share that. And then I also think a lot about the community is far beyond Discord. So it's anyone who like wants to engage in the project, whether it's someone who's like, Discord is way too hectic for me. Here's my email. We have a lot of email lists, or our Twitter followers are pretty active. And so thinking about community beyond just like the one tool that you use for it, it's like, how can you touch everyone that's involved in the project and still give them ways to participate through the other tools that you use. And we have contributors that aren't in Discord. We have some contributors in Discord. So it's a process of managing members from all different perspectives and interests and associations.
I know that Leah has a wrap-up question, and we only have 5 minutes. So I'm going to ask all 3 of you guys a very short question. If you could just, and I apologize because this is a cruel question, if you could in one sentence say what you think is most compelling about sort of Web3 when it comes to activism, and then in a second sentence, what you have found to be most frustrating or problematic about Web3 when it comes to activism.
Okay, I can try. That was a cool question.
I do apologize in advance.
The most exciting to me is that the technology seems to be able to give power back to the people where people otherwise feel like they don't have it. And then the most challenging thing is, like Molly said, the issue is really timely, the topical thing at hand. And so needing to figure things out while you're flying the plane. You're building the plane while you're flying it has been challenging, especially on the legal front. There's a lot of gray area, and figuring out what the right structure is took a long time, and it was hard.
I agree with that. I'll just I'll chime in a little bit of a pivot, like from a creative perspective. I think what's been most exciting is seeing how you can kind of, your project can grow a life of its own beyond, like I built something, it goes on, the community is really the value, and they are the ones that like that champion the project, that continue, that it becomes a culture around that project. So there's something really neat about that, about being able to set that off into the world. On the flip side of that, which is so Web3, is that it really takes a lot as an artist. I think we ask a lot of artists in this space, even for a project like this, of what, Web3 moves at crazy pace, and just being able to kind of find your footing, find a speed that makes sense to also not burn out, to last, to make sure that we're thinking about all of these projects is really here for a long time.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the answer to both of those is the same thing, which is with Web3, you're often sort of dropping people in the deep end. And I know everybody's talked about this, but that's both positive. You drop people off in the deep end, and once they make that leap, then they can do incredible things. And you've removed that barrier, that conceptual barrier for them. But on the flip side of that, now you have somebody who's in the deep end who it can be hard to get other people, right? You have almost the inertia of getting, especially their social group in real, away from the keyboard. That's really hard. So you sort of end up with another friendly geek rather than necessarily, getting an average user. And I think we need to figure out how we're going to sort of simplify these things and meet those challenges. So.
Thank you, guys.
We have 2 minutes left. I'm going to try it, and hopefully this is another rapid round. So everybody, what's your advice for the long haul of resisting forced birth? How do you hope people will be engaging in this effort a year from now?
I don't know if this is an overall answer, but I think it relates to our DAO and our project. I think when we launched our DAO, we just kind of did all hands on deck, everybody being able to donate what their little skill set is. And I think keeping it, being able to find value in Web3, this is probably Web2 actually too, where you can say, I know how to copyright, I can do this, and this builds a bigger machine that can last longer. I think by being able to tap into people's own resources, they do really with ease, it's their background that maybe they wouldn't have been able to apply it to an activist cause before, I think helps keep it motivated, as far as people don't know what to do. If they don't feel like they're directly involved, it is really easy to give up. And there are little things we need to make sure that we're monthly donations are great. Money really speaks, but time does too. So if you have time, there's plenty of ways where people can use it. And I think just trying to within yourself, what is sustainable with your skill set, and just try to kind of tap into that. I mean, that's why I make the gifts.
I'm going to second that. I think this talent network can be really powerful, giving people ways to participate with their tangible skills, and creating this network where it's really easy to plug in and it doesn't require so much overhead and thinking about how do I participate. It's, oh, here I can participate and here's how. And then in the long haul, it's about voter activation. I mean, the policy work requires a lot more money and a lot more influence than our project has in its biggest dreams. And we're going to need to figure out how to mobilize voters. So also leveraging your talent and your energy towards getting people to the polls and putting their vote where their mission is, their values are, is going to be really important to sustainable change.
I think we need grassroots activation, right? We need folks to actually be serious about acting outside of the traditional political sphere, as well as, worrying about the voting booth. And that's hard because it usually carries some risk, right? So getting folks that passionate, especially, in real life, I hate saying that, away from keyboard, actually activated, it can be hard. And that's going to be a challenge. But I think for long-term sustainability, we have to look past this election cycle, definitely.
Guys, a tremendous thank you to all of you. That was absolutely incredible.